Hello and welcome. I'm Stuart Anderson from the Northern Ireland Chamber, and today I'm joined by Richard Ramsey. Richard is the Professor of Practice at Queen's Business School, who we run our quarterly survey with. Today we are going to be walking through some of those results and giving some analysis and some thought to what it means. Most notably, Richard, this is taking place, and the fieldwork for this survey took place just ahead of the Iran crisis kind of unfolding. So I think maybe just to kick us off, can you maybe set the scene for where business was at the point of that crisis beginning to kick off?
Well, I suppose we had some momentum going into the turn of the year, although we have seen some revisions to some of the official statistics, which highlights that we didn't have quite the momentum that we thought we had. But the business community in this survey, it seems pretty subdued. We're not too much momentum. The business community has clearly shown resilience for a number of years since COVID, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and subsequent challenges. But we are starting to see signs of this kind of resilience cracking. And whenever we look at this latest survey for the first quarter, in terms of the two sectors, manufacturing and services, it's manufacturing that is performing less well than the likes of services. Services a bit brighter, but we are seeing confidence easing for both sectors. We're seeing profitability easing for both sectors, and we are seeing high levels of recruitment. But this is not necessarily in terms of increasing employment. It's just a reflection of the ongoing hiring and recruitment challenges that the business community faces. And I suppose what we are bearing in mind here is, as you highlighted, this is effectively going to be the benchmark from which we're then going to then gauge the impact of Donald Trump's Operation Epic Fury. And we are expecting to see a deterioration in a number of fronts in the coming months.
Thank you for that. One of the things I think that we wanted to pick up on was throughout the past year, we have seen this perception that, at least on a relative basis, Northern Ireland seemed to be performing relatively well, and in some cases seem to be performing exceptionally well. And we've seen some revision to that, some downward revision to that. Do you think that that is now giving us a sense of, okay, the Northern Ireland economy is maybe not where it was, and therefore what do we need to be thinking and what do we need to be doing about it?
Well, you're right. This kind of downward revisions were highlighting that the Northern Ireland economy, we didn't have quite the strength and strong growth that we thought we had, although we were still faring better than the rest of the UK, other UK regions. And I think factors behind why that was the case, because we're the only part of the UK to share a land border with the Republic of Ireland and the Eurozone. And while that was a significant headwind to the economy back after the global financial crisis, it's been a steady economic tailwind for Northern Ireland in recent years, and that has boosted a lot of demand for business, both manufacturing and services, and also in terms of public spending as well. Public spending this financial year was a relatively good year. It's going to be more challenging going forward. And also, you could argue the fact that Stormont has been overspending and going beyond its budget. That has then also had a positive effect in terms of the economy. So I think, yes, we've been overperforming relative to other UK regions. I think it's going to be more challenging in the year ahead, and we may actually see that flip. And particularly from pressure on the public finances, next year is going to be more difficult than this year. And our exposure to some of the issues and inflationary pressures, such as our overexposure to home heating oil, where almost 2/3 of households here experience or utilise home heating oil, whereas it's about a third or so in the likes of GB, and they have households who have filled their tanks recently will have noticed that the cost of home heating oil has more than doubled since the military action, and the conflict began at the end of February.
And when you're thinking this through, and as you say, there is that sense of nervousness that we will maybe flip from being in a relatively better position than perhaps some of the other UK regions heading into the crisis, that you'll see that flip because of that mixture of issues, whether it's the public finances challenges that we have here or the overexposure to home heating oil. And then you look at the survey as well, and it touches on the Windsor framework, and we see the issues just over 2025, and we were drawing those out, and 46% are saying that they saw some degree of impact. And you set that against the south, where you've got a very clear pipeline for things like infrastructure over the next 10 years. What do you think that will mean for business in Northern Ireland? Do you think you'll see more of trade moving across the island, or services maybe dipping more into the southern economy to sustain both margin and to sustain pipeline?
Absolutely. I think the local services firms have already been clearly dipping into the southern market, and are probably trying to expand and grow their share and compete with competitors in the south. And yes, given UK economy is going to be more challenging going ahead, I think that's undoubtedly what they're going to do. I think I do sort of feel as if a lot of businesses, particularly SMEs, clearly don't have their sorrows to seek with all the challenges they face when they're trying to grapple with a lot of the increase in the taxation, business costs, labour costs, the likes of the national living wage increases, the employers' national insurance contributions, all of which have been kicking in earlier this month. And then they have to wrestle with Windsor framework, then what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz and all the increased cost pressures, which if they haven't hit already, they are going to do in the weeks and months ahead. And then they've got further issues to contend with, such as the good jobs, employment rights legislation and all of that. So I do feel sorry for the business community in terms of thinking of the bandwidth that they have to deal with all these problems, and they're just getting pulled in all directions, and that's less time to actually run the business and to do what they're good at doing. They've got all these distractions to contend with.
And as you rightly point out, this is not the first crisis that we've seen in the last decade. Even coming out of the financial crash, you had the challenges of even dealing with what was going to happen coming out of Brexit. You had COVID, then you had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and all of those crises, plural, all demanding some form of government action or government intervention. What lessons have we learned from those series of crises in terms of what might work in terms of government intervention, and what maybe we need to be more cautious about? Is there anything, particularly from a UK government perspective, with a business hat on, that we would be looking for them to do?
Well, I suppose I think some of the lessons we have learned are, I think the public and perhaps the business community as well, we've become conditioned to UK government being able to do furlough schemes, to then intervene whenever we had, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the huge spike in gas prices. We saw then support for households and business community in terms of energy costs. And I think we've become accustomed to it's like the government will help out, not necessarily bail us out, but subsidise us, and that is almost like the first port of call and the expectation. And I think, given the state of the public finances, the UK public finances, that is now unrealistic. And you even think back to the global financial crisis. Before that, UK debt as a proportion of GDP was around 40%. Yeah. Whereas now, after all the various subsidies, effects for the bailouts of the banking sector, and then subsequently, whenever we had COVID, all of bailouts and additional public spending then, and
the fiscal rules,
and all of that, and we then have debt as a percentage of GDP is in the 90s sort of percent. So the room to manoeuvre, and I know you'll have politicians, local politicians, saying about these Rachel Reeves hemmed in by her own fiscal rules and things like that. you know, there is a limit to what UK government can do, and they're pushing up towards the limits of that. So it's increasingly difficult. And I know there'll be sort of calls for reducing fuel duty, sort of tax cuts and things there. And that sounds like an obvious thing to do. But remember, one of the problems that we've got here is we've got a shortage of energy in terms of oil, and that's why the price is spiking. And when that feeds through into the likes of petrol and diesel as well, if you end up then subsidising the cost of that, that is potentially just going to, as the IMF says, that's pouring gasoline on the fire, and that will make prices higher for longer. And so so unfortunately, I think they often say in financial markets, the cure for high oil prices is high oil prices, that ultimately then there will have to be, the market will have to then, you'll see a decline in economic activity, a decline in demand, and that is how you're going to see prices fall. Whereas if you're actually throwing sort of subsidies, particularly if they're not targeted, to specific sectors, whether there's like agriculture or, the haulage industry, I cannot see that where the government is going to do that other than do a kind of window dressing move to do something which is a token rather than being anything meaningful.
Yeah, and just to close that out, there's a lot of debate, a lot of discussion around what Stormont can do, what it can't do to help the business community, and not only with the cost of living crisis, but cost of doing business crisis. We're just around a year away from an election. We've obviously had some discussion around the Good Jobs Bill and whether there is sufficient time to scrutinise that, to have full cognizance of the potential impact that might have on SMEs. What can Stormont conceivably do within the next year to help the business community? Is it just those big structural issues from wastewater to planning to skills, or is there anything that they can do in terms of the immediate fuel crisis, for want of a better expression?
Well, I think the Northern Ireland public finances, as we highlighted earlier, are not in a great shape. So even if the Stormont executive, who undoubtedly would have be sympathetic to the calls and the plight of households and businesses who are feeling these increased energy costs, this, intervening in this is, perhaps not a sensible thing to do, other than if you can do something targeted. For example, if it is in terms of the agriculture sector and how it is feeling difficulties, other than, because there isn't a pot of money around, particularly in Stormont, and I don't see anything meaningful really being forthcoming from Rachel Reeves either at this stage.
Sure.
Any money or funds for the likes of agriculture, I'm sure they would have to be then looking at allocating existing spending and reprioritising spending from existing Department of Agriculture and Environment and Rural Affairs budgets to that.
Yeah.
And whether, again, when you're having some of the monitoring rounds, if there's anything sort of left over, you will have some potential pots of money which may sound big in terms of some sort of funds, but maybe like single digit sort of millions or something like that. But practically, they're not going to do much. And so the Stormont executive, other than doing some kind of fiscal window dressing, it doesn't have the power to deal with something which is outside of its control.
Does it put an onus on them to deal with some of those bigger issues, though, like wastewater, where you can see already the clear impact? Now, this isn't immediately solvable, but you can see the impact that it's having on the housing sector, for example, rental prices, house prices. Should the focus clearly be on those structural issues that are within their power and control? Absolutely, because what we've seen is then a variety of crises have come along, whether it's COVID, whether it's the energy cost spike after the Russia invaded Ukraine, and food price inflation and all of those kind of things, whether it's Brexit. And
invariably our local politicians, they've become fixated on the latest crisis and how they can deal with that. But what the problem is, and has been the problem in Northern Ireland, is how government has performed in between the various crises. So these crises will come and go and they're outside of our control.
Sure.
But it is what we're focused on week in, week out, month in, month out, on areas which are inside our control. What Rachel Reeves does or doesn't do, politicians can lobby for that, but what we do with our wastewater infrastructure, how we fund it, how we look at doing that, that is having a material impact. And, we talk about crises and kind of emergencies. There's a housing emergency on at the minute.
Yeah.
And that is causing huge problems for households, for the citizens in this part of the world. And then, ultimately it's impacting sort of on businesses as well.
Yeah.
That is something which does lie in our control. And in my view, it's better focusing and redoubling our efforts in sorting out the problems that we can control and leaving those issues which are outside of our control to people better placed to deal with them.
Thank you for that, Richard. That was really instructive. It was really helpful to actually think about those broader issues, those structural issues that are continuing to rumble on, that coming when you see, as you say, crisis coming and going, there's still those issues that we need to be encouraging our politicians to focus on. And certainly that's where our minds will be as a chamber, as well as pushing Westminster on those levers that it has to deal with the issues as and when they need to. Thank you.